get started. I discovered last week I had the mute button on, but I just unmuted it. And I thought you were coming in to check. So if you were looking for the class last week, unfortunately, user error. Thanks, Annika. I just remembered. Hey, it didn't record right last week. Okay, I'm excited to do just something fun with you today. Next week we'll probably do something a little bit related to Holy Week and probably look at the, come back at the concept of the atonement, why Jesus died, the resurrection, do some good theology to set you up for Holy Week. So that'll be the plan next week. Going forward after that, we will be doing more practical sessions, 3 sessions on getting your house in order. So we're going to give you lots of resources, whether you're young or old, doesn't matter. And so I'm really excited about that class. It'll be good. So what is our topic today? I came across this recently. I had not heard about it. It's really kind of bizarre and interesting that it hadn't been. So I say a recent and newly released discovery. It's called the Megiddo Mosaic. And it's termed by people across the board as one of the most important archaeology discoveries in Israel in this century. So it's like second to the Dead Sea Scrolls type of thing. So it's a big deal and it's pretty cool. You see just a little bit of the mosaic there. So we're going to talk about it. It's currently being housed, believe it or not, in the Bible Museum in the U.S., in the South. I forget where that is. It's in D.C., I think. And we'll talk maybe about some fringe, behind-the-scenes issues around that. But I wanted to put this picture up for you so you can see the size of it. It was discovered in Megiddo in Israel, and they actually brought it over to the United States for display. I don't know how they got it over, but I guess they took it up in pieces and put it back together. This is a reconstruction of what the room would have been like that it was found in. You can see here, the mosaic underneath. And what do you see in the middle? A table. Yeah, right. So we're going to talk some more about that. So this is some people who were working on it when it was in place. And you see in the background there what looks like a prison, right? Well, it was found on a maximum security prison in Israel. Off to the side there, we're going to do some new construction. And anywhere now in Israel, you do any new construction, you have to dig down to make sure you're not covering up any archaeological sites. That's the way the town of Magdala was found back in 2008. And lo and behold, they find this. This was in 2005, though, that it was found. So, but just released in 2023. So I don't know if people knew about this or why it was. I think the only thing I've been able to read so far is that for security reasons, because they didn't want it to be vandalized or something like that. And so they kept it pretty quiet. Now, like I say, but the cool thing about this mosaic is by the coins that were found with it and the actual writing of the inscriptions, because there's inscriptions on it which make it the most fascinating and interesting, dates back to 230 AD. So remember, we're going to celebrate in the fall the 1700th anniversary of the Nicene Creed, which was created in essence in 325, the Council of Nicaea. So this is 75 years before that, and so that's just important for you to know. So it's a Christian mosaic, and people are calling it a prayer room or a worship room. And the reason, like you say, the reason it's so important is it's got a trio of 3rd century Christian inscriptions. That's the 200s. And there's a fish symbol right in the middle, which you can see this one lady's just working around two fish here in the very middle. So that's interesting. And so this is kind of just some more information on it. They were found in a 16 by 32 foot room in a building used by officers of the Roman Legio the Sixth Ferrata. That's the 6th Ironclad Legion in the Jewish Samaritan village of Kfar Othne on the grounds of the Megiddo prison. This is, so what that's saying is that it is, they have now archaeologically discovered that this was a what would you call a barracks or a big buildings that housed the Roman army. Barracks. Thank you. I could not. I got it. So and it's happened to be now next to a prison in Israel, but nonetheless, that's what they found. And in that barracks, all the complex of buildings, they found this mosaic that had been amazingly preserved. And I'll tell you some more why. It dates to, that it was constructed around 230 AD, which is incredibly early. So we've got that trio, so the fish symbol's there in the middle. So it has incredible, important applications on Christian history and theology. We learn something about Christian history and the church, and we learn something about theology by these inscriptions, believe it or not. So, this is where Megiddo is, if you don't know. Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea down below. This is the Jezreel Valley. Mount Carmel's in here, over here. When you visit Israel, if we ever get to go again, you start off here and we hear about Elijah and all the stories around him. But this is also, this valley, and Megiddo is in the book of Revelation. It's kind of Armageddon is the translation of that. But nonetheless, this is a beautiful area of Israel, and this is where this Christian prayer room was discovered from 230 AD. Let's see, so getting a little closer there for you. This is from the air view. This is the where the mosaic was found. This is the Tel Megiddo. Megiddo is a place going back thousands of years where civilizations just keep building on top of each other, and so it's like a mountain, a small hill, a large, maybe a mountain, not by our standards, but maybe by Israel's standards. But and it's just because they kept building it up. So Megiddo is a very famous archaeological site, but they find at this modern prison where that they had kind of built over the top of where this Roman barracks and group of buildings were, which, interestingly enough, has a Christian prayer room in it. Yeah. Wow, interesting. So how it was discovered, I've told you that. Christian history at the time, let's remember some things. Christianity in 313, I think it is, Constantine, the emperor, made Christianity legal. Many people mess this up and think that he made Christianity the religion of the state or something. No, there were a certain number of religions that were legal. It's kind of like modern day China, truthfully. You've got two versions of Catholicism. You've got a Protestant church, and I think maybe one other. I think the Latter-day Saint church has got an approved status. But any other Christian groups are illegal. Like, that's why the house church is getting so much trouble in China. But people go freely to worship as long as they're part of these approved denominations or religions. Well, Christianity, when this mosaic was created, was not a legal religion. It was, in essence, illegal. So Christianity is growing. Of course, we know Jesus dies around 30. We know Paul writes in the 50s. The church is starting. So this is roughly 200 years, or a little less than 200 years after the Apostle Paul's writing, and the church is growing and spreading throughout Asia Minor and Europe. And but in the Holy Land, there's a thriving Christian communities starting, And so remember that. But then also remember that before Constantine in 313, the emperor was called Diocletian. And this emperor was the worst on Christians. You may have heard about Nero back in the 60s or 50s, 60s who persecuted Christians. A lot of people think the book of Revelation 666 is maybe referring as a code language to Nero. And you can do some things with the numbering of letters in Greek, and I won't go into all of that. Other than, by the way, I know I've told you this before, but they've discovered a new manuscript of Revelation. It's palimpsest, I think they call it, where the top, where the writing had been scraped off and then reused, but what was underneath was the book of Revelation, and they now with the technology been able to read it. And guess what? The number of it's a little piece of the number of the beast. And it's not 666, it's 616 or 613 or something. So all those people with tattoos, they got it wrong maybe. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But nonetheless, so if Nero might have been in view of the book of Revelation a little bit, we don't know, that's a guess. But so then throughout the early period of Christianity, Christians were not like being thrown to the lions all the time. We have this view that they are just constantly under persecution. No, the persecutions would come and go and come and go. You know how cultures like to scapegoat people. So anyway, some of that was going on. But when Diocletian comes on in the middle of the 3rd century, he's horrible. He is the worst killer and persecutor of Christians. And that's going to become important as we look at this mosaic, believe it or not. And in fact, he went around destroying Christian manuscripts. It's a miracle we have the ancient manuscripts that we do. And it's no surprise that most of them we find in Egypt, not in the Holy Land. Of course, Egypt is dry and it's, papyrus might survive over thousands of years in those. It wouldn't survive in the Northwest, for that long. So you need the right kind of climate, but also Diocletian was about destroying Christianity and Christians. So right before Constantine, who becomes a Christian, kind of, you've got the worst persecutor. And that may be part of the background for why we've discovered this mosaic. So why is it so well preserved? What I've read so far is the archaeologists believe it was intentionally covered up. They had all kinds of pottery sherds, and it seemed to have been intentionally covered up. Why? Well, what would you do if you wanted to preserve something if the Roman, now it was illegal, not only it was illegal to be a Christian, but also that, the government's coming in and wiping out anybody that's affiliated or anything that looks Christian. So, interesting. So it's purposely covered up, most likely. Just like the city of Magdala and the synagogue that you see now when you go there, it was covered up shortly after the Romans destroyed that city in the first revolt by a landslide. And until 2008 or whenever it was discovered, no one knew where it was. But clink, the Catholic Church started to build a retreat center there, and they had to do research, and one of the last places they checked, they put the stake down and changed everything. That's probably right up there with one of the great discoveries. Okay, so this is what it looks like from the top. This is what it looks like from the top. You saw the picture at the beginning to get an idea of the size. And now we'll zero in on the fish. I think they even think they know what kind of fish it is. Like maybe a tuna and some other. This one has some color in it. Isn't it beautiful? It's amazing. Here's one of the Greek inscriptions. We'll get to those in a minute. But why is fish important? Well, Jesus multiplied the loaves and fishes, and fish became a symbol for Christianity. The legend, of course, you draw one side of the fish, and then if you were a Christian, you draw the other. That's a legend. We don't have any real basis for that, but we know a fish were an early symbol of Christianity. Well, the other reason, and you probably remember this, but what is it? You call that acrostic? Is that what you call it when you have one you have a word, and then each letter represents something. Is that? Is across it. For some reason, sometimes I'm 62 now, or almost 62. I mean, my brain just sometimes things are not there. This is the word fish in Greek. Ichthus is the way it sounds. Ichthus, and so that it just happens that in Greek this is the first letter of the name Jesus, and it just so happens that Chi, the next letter in fish, is the word for Christ. And theta, or theos, is God in Greek. So you've got ichthus there. And then huios is son in Greek. And the sigma is the Savior. So Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. So not only was because of what Jesus did with fish that it was a Christian symbol, but it became an acrostic for a confession, a creed. Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. Okay? So that's why the fish are important. Okay, so let's keep going now. Now we'll come over to this inscription that's over here, and we'll say, what does that say? Anybody want to read that for me? Yeah. The other thing that we know right away that this is early is, in English we have capitals, and you start each sentence with a capital and you go and stuff. Well, that started to happen in Greek too, but many centuries later. In Jesus' time and in the early church time, it was all caps. So immediately if you see Greek in all caps, you got early writing. But there's other reasons, like with coins and other things, that they're very confident with the around 230. So this is what it says. Gaianos, who is also called Porphyry, and so this is Gaianos here, also called, and then we've got the P in here, Porphyry, and then this is Adelphos right here, Adelphos here. Adelphos, does that sound good? Does anybody guess what that is? Brother, exactly, Paul. So, and we're also told centurion. Now we know there's some important centurions in the Bible, right? In the New Testament. And one in particular in Acts who becomes a Christian, and he has this amazing interaction with Peter. So jump forward a couple hundred years, we've got more Roman centurions who are Christian. Gaius, who is also called Porphyry. So this is, I believe, Latin, and this is Greek. So we got his Latin name, which is Roman, and then also his Greek name. A centurion are Adelphos. That Adelphos is a word for your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. So he's a brother. Having earnestly desired to do so, has commissioned this Mosaic inscription. So he paid for it. And then Brutus has done the work. So that's what it says on the other side. Now, don't get any ideas, because, I love when people give beautiful gifts to the church, but I don't like plaques everywhere. We'd have plaques everywhere, But this is some precedence here. I better rethink that. So we've got who commissioned it, who paid for it, and who did the work. And that this Roman centurion was a Christian. So was he hiding it at this point when it's made? No. It's in a Roman barracks. And they have a room that's clearly for worship, which I'll explain to you in a little bit. So this is wild. This is like, what does this tell us about what was Christianity like at the time? Well, you've got a centurion who's setting up a prayer room or a worship room in the military barracks. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? Isn't that cool? Are you excited? I think it's cool. But anyway, I'm a geek about all this stuff. So, geek out with me. Okay, so now we're going to go over to the other side of the Mosaic inscription. But before we do that, what do you see here?
Yeah, just stones.
Just some stones, right? Well, we're going to see, because of what's said in this inscription, that there was a table on these stones. So what do you do on a table? You eat. And what kind of eating do you do if it's a Christian prayer hall?
Last Supper?
The Last Supper. Yeah. There's very little doubt about this. Now, some people, I've tried to read tons and listen to tons, and there's some people that, kind of, everybody can make their own conclusions, I guess. But it seems very clear that there was a table here, because of once I explained to you what these two inscriptions say, that this was not only a place of prayer, which some people are calling it, but a place of worship where Christians would celebrate the Eucharist. We know early on that they would gather to hear the word and break bread with the Lord's Supper. So that's exciting in and of itself. Okay, but now I'm flipping it around. I'm flipping it over just so I can fit it in the screen better, and we'll look at these different inscriptions in this one side. We're going to start over here, and this is what it looks like a little closer up. And it says, remember Primula and Syriaca and Dorothea, and moreover also Cresty. Now, you don't know Greek, so that's like, okay, that's cool. But what does it sound like by listening to those names? Do they sound like men's names or women's? All four women. So in this Christian prayer hall, you have four women who we're told to remember them. Now, we have no idea why we're being asked to remember them, obviously. Were they martyred as Christians? Was that part of what prompted the covering up of this? We don't know. Were they just people, great leaders in the church? Which is more where I go. You don't put in the prayer hall to remember certain people who were unimportant to the community. They were obviously very important to their community, that they would be remembered. Now, of course, this is interesting in our current milieu of Christianity, where we debate about what women can do and what they can't do and all of that. And this doesn't settle anything necessarily, other than to say, pretty interesting that some women in 230 AD were so important to the community that they have their names. Now, let's put the Romans in the context. In the Roman world, women could not even testify in court. This is why in the Gospels, the fact that the women were the first witnesses of the resurrection. I mean, if you were going to make up a story, you wouldn't have women be the first witnesses, because people didn't believe they had any credibility. So why would the gospel writers make that up if that's not actually what happened? I think that's an interesting thought. But nonetheless, it seems like, think about what Paul says in Galatians. There's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free. Christianity in its early is described, as we get into the 2nd and 3rd century, by secular sources as a religion of slaves and women, and but we also know there were very wealthy people in the Christian community. Look, this Roman centurion, you know what a mosaic is, right? These are little tiles that big. Can you imagine the labor costs to do that? I mean, the artistry involved with the colors and everything, it's actually mind-boggling. And so it's just a little bit of a glimpse into what was the early church like. I mean, we can't go too far, but we can say, wow, that Christians seem to be departing from the very limited role that women had in Roman society. Now, how far it departed, of course, is, up to it's a whole other subject. But I think that's fascinating to me, because this would never be true in a public building in Rome. I mean, it's not, you don't find it, you don't see it, and here these four women are highlighted. Very interesting.
Especially in a Roman
male barracks.
It's,
That's
right,
amazing.
right, right, in a military kind of situation. So I don't know if, and it must be that Christians were coming and worshiping in this space and then leaving, but it's just this interesting mix, isn't it? It's just fascinating to me, yes.
Well, that's that the centurion, the military guy, ordered it.
Mm-hmm.
So-
And here's a leader in the Roman army
Yeah.
that's a Christian and is above board about it, and, you know. Now, he obviously wouldn't be able to be above board about it very much longer when the Diocletian got going, which is a little number of years later. But anyway, fascinating thing. Okay, let's get to the other, which is these inscriptions are not really even the big inscriptions that are interesting. Are the biggest of the inscriptions, I should say. All right, so let's go back in and zero in on this other side now, and now we'll come over here and look at this one. And I'll flip it over for you, I think. There we go. So here's the table over here, and then this is the inscription here. Some people think, as I read, that the table might have been here because the letters are facing upward this way, but the other ones are the other way around. But it seems to me, since these big stones were found there, that that obviously would have been where the wooden table, the piece of wood that was on top, was laid or put. What you're going to see here now, and this is a much nicer picture of it, but look at right there. What do you notice? You got this writing, and again, you don't need to know Greek. You got all this stuff here. You got theos right there, Theos. But you've got little lines above the letters here, don't you? Can you see that? Here, I'll show you. Okay, there's a better straight-on picture of it. So, let's take a look, but let's hear what it says first. Ekepeptos, the friend of God, has offered the table in honor of God, Jesus Christ. That's what it says. Some people translate it, Epectus, a friend of God, has, in remembrance of, has offered the table in remembrance of God, Jesus Christ. I think it makes sense given, I think the honor is the best translation of the Greek here. But nonetheless, we don't have to parse that too bad. This is pros, and then this is the guy's name, Akepektos. This is an S in Greek. So his name is here. But then a friend of God, so philia, there's the phi in there, and theos. But now let's just get down to here. We don't need to translate it all out. But we've got two letters here with a line over it, and then it's hard to see that there's a distinction, but there's two letters here with two dots in between. Do you see that? Okay. And then a chi and a omega. So, first of all, before I go into what that line is, think about what we've got here. The 2nd century, we've got an inscription that puts God and Jesus Christ together. Correct. Now again, this doesn't settle everything. There's all kinds of, the struggles around the Holy Trinity are going to be worked out another 100 years later, 150 years later. But it is interesting where there are so many hypercritical scholars today who, Bart Ehrman is the most famous, want to say that in essence the church created Jesus' divinity later, like at the Council of Nicaea, which they didn't at all, or whatever. But that's the Bart Ehrman's written a book called How Jesus Became God. So originally, he was just this teacher, rabbi, and Christians started to, whip things up a little bit. And then way later in the 4th century is when that comes on. Well, again, this doesn't totally settle it, but here Jesus is put with God. And the Greek is such that it's not in table of God and Jesus Christ. There's no and, it's put all together. And now it's even stronger because of these lines, which I'm going to explain in a minute. But this, so not only do we get an inscription about who paid for the mosaic, we also get who donated the table. Now I'm really in trouble with not having plaques on everything. Don't get any ideas, I'm telling you. All right, no, that's okay. It's okay to have a few plaques, but where does it stop, right? Okay, well, let's zero in on these lines. So what we find out, and if you want the Latin, nomina sacra. Christians early on started abbreviating holy words. So, and we don't know exactly why they did this. But if you go back to some of the papyrus, P46, P47, like this is 2nd century or early 3rd century manuscripts, we see in the papyrus that when they get to Jesus, they only use 2 letters. The first 2 letters of the word Yesu. And that's what you got here between this dot and that dot. And what they would do is when they abbreviated, they would put a line over it. So this tells us this is a nomina sacra. This is an abbreviation. Probably, maybe practically, when you think about papyrus, how expensive it is, just think of how much space you would save if every time you came to Jesus, you only used 2 letters instead of 5 or whatever. So there might have been that. But I want to explain that I think there's more to it than that. Although we can only we don't have any 2nd century Christians to tell us why they did that. And I don't think we, in the early church fathers, tell us. But so over here then, you have the abbreviation for God. You've got a theta and an omega, which is for theos in Greek. So you've got an abbreviation of God, you've got an abbreviation of Jesus, and you've got an abbreviation of Christ. Christos. So why did Christians do this? Well, like I say, there's probably practical reasons. But in the Old Testament, if you remember, as you know, I've taught you for so many years, so I'm sure you remember this, but I'll just review it. That in Hebrew, you would never pronounce God's name, the tetragrammaton as it's called, which respectfully I can say most likely is Yahweh. I am who I am, God says to Moses. And pious Jewish people would never say that. God's name was too sacred to speak. So when they knew in their head, whenever they get to the sacred name, they would say Adonai, which is the word for Lord in Hebrew. Jump 1,000 years after Jesus, and people are struggling to remember how to do Hebrew. There was a group of scholars called the Masoretes who said, you know what? We need to help people with Hebrew because we're forgetting things. And the reason they were forgetting things is in Hebrew there's no vowels. They're all assumed. You just know where they go. And probably if I put English writing, cat with no I, N, TH, no E, H, no A, and T, you would go cat and hat or whatever. You would get it. But in Hebrew, that's the way it was. Well, people were forgetting where the vowels were. So there's a group of scholars called the Masoretes who invented this brilliant way of putting the vowels in. Some vowels were preserved because a consonant can be a vowel and a consonant in some cases. But they would put little dots below or above to tell you where it was. You know what they did with God's holy name so no one would mess it up? They put the vowels for Lord underneath God's name. So you would know for sure, don't say this. If you did say that, you know what it would sound like? Jehovah. Jehovah's nothing. Sorry, I'm not saying. The word Jehovah never was said. It's a complete misunderstanding. You got the consonants for God and the vowel points for Lord, Adonai, and you put those together and you get Jehovah. And no one ever said Jehovah, but now people who don't know, of course we got all kinds of things that have come from that. But nonetheless, they had a way to say, this is God, this is God, this is God's holy name. And then they would start sometimes, like in Greek Old Testament manuscripts of the Greek Old Testament of the of the Old Testament, they would sometimes, you're reading along in Greek, but then they put God's name, they put the ancient Hebrew in there. So they jump back in. So there was a bit of a tradition of making the holy name different and special. And maybe that's what's behind this. It could be. It could be more than just practical. But nonetheless, what we've got, a 230 AD inscription, mosaic floor, that says God and Jesus in the same breath. What do we do with that? Interesting, huh? So that's a nomina sacra, it's called, those abbreviations. The critics of Christianity, the ones that we have, where we've got some Roman people criticizing Christians, they say Christians get together and worship Jesus as God. And also, Christians early on, Polycarp was martyred as an atheist. Why was Polycarp, one of the first Christian martyrs that we hear about, murdered for being an atheist? Why would they say that about him? Well, he didn't believe in all those other gods. So they said he was an atheist. He rejected all these multiple gods and polytheistic kind of worldview. He said, no, there's one God. And so he was killed as an atheist, which of course he wasn't. He believed in Christ as God. So, interesting. So, what are our applications? Well, I think it's really fascinating that we see a glimpse of the inroads of Christianity into the Greco-Roman world. You've got a centurion who's a Christian who donates this. We've got a floor that was intentionally covered up so it wouldn't be destroyed. Diocletian persecution. And you've got a Roman soldier worshiping with women who are really important to the community. That's cool and fascinating. So we've got a little bit of a glimpse of the importance of women in the early church, and we don't even need to go to early Christian history to see that. The Apostle Paul calls women, he uses the word in Greek that we get the word synergy from, as my fellow laborers. Synergy. This is what he calls many women, my fellow workers. And we've got Phoebe, who's a deacon, who carries Paul's letter to Rome. And when you carried a letter to Rome, when you carried a letter for someone, you were in charge of helping them understand what it says. That was a part of the way it was. And so we've got a woman. So we got and look at the way Jesus treated women. He had Mary kneel at his feet. That was just absolutely unbelievable in Jesus' day. We brush right by it because what's the big deal? Because of our current cultural context, which I'm glad we kind of do, since it doesn't seem like a big deal. But it was. A woman taking the role of a student, and Jesus didn't say, get up, what are you doing? Go work with Martha. No. He said she's chosen the right thing. You look at the way Jesus treated women compared to the way Rome and Greeks and the surrounding world, and it's a mind blower. So we don't have to go to early Christian history, but it is interesting that we see these women taking a big role. This doesn't settle anything. I know we still have the passage in Timothy and 1 Corinthians that a lot of folks always go to when it comes to the role of women in the church, and we'll keep debating that, I guess. But when you look at the rest of Scripture along with that, I think there's something else going on here. So anyway, fascinating there. I think the divinity of Christ is affirmed here. Now, again, it doesn't settle things. There were some people at this time who talked about Jesus as divine, but like a sub-God. And then, that's of course what the Council of Nicaea struggles with. This is, by the way, what Islam says about Jesus. He's like a special prophet, but he's not God. You know, God is God and Jesus is Son. So, you know, so we work this out. But I would say this moves us to a higher Christology, I think. That, you know, you mentioned Jesus and God in the same thing. Like I've also mentioned to you that when the New Testament says Jesus is Lord, and now I told you what Greek word did they use to translate the Hebrew name of God? Lord. So there's a lot to that. One of our congregations nearby, because Lord has a masculine, underpinning, I guess you could say, they've stopped saying the word Lord. And I understand why they're trying to do that, because it's a stumbling block for some, but to me, I can't let go of that because of that connection with God. You know, that this is so, but anyway, that's also not the topic for the day. So the divinity of Christ, I think, is affirmed, and the nomina sacra is important. And that kind of helps elevate the importance of this. But did you know this existed? Anybody ever heard of this ever before? Wow. I hadn't either until about 3 months ago. Okay, now, I know you haven't had a chance to talk or input or anything, but any questions about this? Or, yeah, Roberta.
You said it's in the museum
Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C.
and how do you know how?
I do. Thank you. You set me up just perfect. So I'll finish with an important side issue about this. Because anytime, archaeology is always political. And always, so the question is, how did the Bible Museum in the United States in Washington, D.C. get this honor? So the Bible Museum, as I understand it, and if I was in D.C., I'd go. Because I'm a geek. I love all this stuff. But they've had some trouble. They displayed some Dead Sea Scroll fragments that turned out to be forgeries. Now, they were fooled. They were taken as somebody, it was fraud, and it was discovered. And they've had some other issues. They're a very conservative, American, evangelical-backed museum. I don't know anything about Hobby Lobby, but anyway, I guess they're big donors to this museum. And some, not all, American evangelical Christians are what we call Christian Zionists. They look at the modern state of Israel as biblical Israel, and that it's a part of the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy when Israel was formed, etc. And, we can have a hopefully respectful conversation about whether that's true or not. I personally feel that Israel's a very important ally, and it's a democracy, and they're going through their struggles like we're going through ours and all that. But I don't see them as like biblical Israel. Biblical Israel led up to Jesus. I believe all Old Testament prophecies went to Jesus. And so I at least have a question mark about that. They're a democracy. Ancient Israel was a theocracy. There's all kinds of problems with it, but some Christian Zionists believe that the formation of Israel and the continuation of Israel and support Israel no matter what is a part of biblical, mandate type of thing. Now again, we can have a wonderful disagreement about that, but here you've got Israel and the current industry giving this incredible thing to a museum that, Israel's right no matter what. This type of thing. So we don't know why, but underneath all of this, where it's housed currently, Roberta, is, there's probably a lot of politics and power stuff underneath. But you know what? I'm just glad we get to see it. I'm not minimizing the other surrounding things. So if I didn't tell you about this, and you read about it, you might go, how did Pastor Bill didn't tell us that there's all this other stuff circling around? There is, but again, there's no doubt this is 230 AD. This is a Christian inscriptions. This is a Christian mosaic. It's probably our oldest Christian worshiping place. There's one other, I think, in in Iraq or something that's, that may be alongside as far as the age of it. But it's the earliest church we've ever seen. So pretty cool, pretty amazing. And yeah, so next time I'm in DC, well, it's only there for 9 months and it goes back. And I guess the plan is that there's going to be a permanent, place for it, which will be a huge tourist attraction if, people can never go back. So anyway, there you go. Jesus Christ, what is it? Let's see, let's go back. Let's finish with what it said right here. Let's get the little deal. Did I pass it?
Pastor Bill.
I did. Okay, sorry. Yes, go ahead, Joyce.
Pastor Bill, I'm curious about the layout. They all look like prayer rugs.
They look like prayer rugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about that.
Like prayer rugs in
Just
yeah. Well,
ancient prayer rugs.
yeah. And
kind
that's
of what it looks
That's what it looks like, and I think that's true. I think it was a place of prayer, and then with the table there, worship.
Yeah.
It's also a square, which is what we find, or a rectangle, which is what we find in early synagogues that have been unearthed and discovered, like in Magdala. It's a little rectangle
Yeah.
with a spot in the middle to read the scripture and do the prayers. And here, the addition is now there's a table for most likely the Eucharist. Yeah. Friend of God has offered the table in honor of God, Jesus Christ.
That's amazing.
Interesting.
What
Amazing.
is the word Ekeptus? Is that a name?
It's a name. Yeah, and it's right here. So this is not, let's see. I think this is a female, let's see, wait. No, I can't remember if this is a male or not. I think it is a female. I think all the names but the two, yes, it is a female. All the names but the two, the centurion and the craftsman who did it. So again, that's another great point, Dave. I didn't even talk about that. Here, a woman has the means to give this table for worship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. Very good. And if I got that wrong, you can look it up, but I don't think so. I think all the names but the two builders, yes. Wait.
Just an observation from an archaeological standpoint, and what really intrigues me is the purposeful cover-up of this
Yes.
to protect it.
Yeah.
There's been a recent find on the Orkney Islands. This is a Neolithic site.
Okay.
The butterfly stone, the blue axe, etc.
Okay.
There's a structure on that site that they believe, and this is the nature of archaeological discoveries.
Right.
A lot of theorizing about what happened. But anyway, there's a structure there that housed children and small animals. They were all in the same place, buried in the same place.
Yeah.
That too was purposely
Yes, covered up
protected.
to protect.
And they just recently uncovered that.
Wow.
And the same kind of speculation. Why would they hide this?
Right.
What was so important about this? This is Neolithic. I mean, we're clearly farther.
Yeah, even going way back, that
But
they
I
knew.
just find that intriguing that Neolithic ancestors also purposely covered sites of honor,
Yeah.
for lack
Oh,
of a
yeah.
better term.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And whether it happens on purpose or by accident, like in Magdala, but like what we find in Magdala is they had taken some of the pillars and put it by the entrances, and we realized, oh, well, they did that to protect from the Romans, which didn't work. But then shortly after that, there's a recorded landslide that covered it up, just by accident, so, by accident. Anyway, okay, this was fun. Thank you for letting me bring you this cool stuff. Go in peace, serve the Lord.